I titled the message this morning, church, God's highest calling for every parent, raising children God's way. I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be about the hardest thing you'll ever do as an adult, if you're married, is raising kids. It's easy to make kids, but boy, raising them, boy, that's going to be the rest of your life. And it doesn't end when they turn 18 and move away. I've heard people say, Herb, they come back. You know, like termites. You thought you fumigated, and they're 30, 35, 40. They're down in our basement. They come back. And more. Someone said, can I keep the grandkids and not have my kids stay? So we're going to talk about raising children God's way. As we look at this passage this morning, this is the ideal family. Any family that's living like this, okay? 3 weeks ago we talked about wives, your highest calling is to submit to your husband. And that's going to be the most difficult thing you're going to do in the relationship between you and your spouse. And then we talked about husband, your highest calling then is to love your wife so much that you put her interests and desires over yours. That means if you really wanted that tennis racket, you really wanted that boat, but you know your wife wanted this, then you show her love by sacrificing the way Jesus did for the church. And then you so put her interest above yourselves that you love her because that's her greatest need, and you sacrifice for her. And what woman would not want to follow a man like that? Now, that's going to be a weird-looking marriage. You'll be made fun of. If you have a marriage like that, they'll say you're antiquated, you're puritanical, you're Victorian, you're 1500s. Y'all are so out of touch. That's because they're jealous because their marriages aren't like that. And then you show me a family where a kid or two are submitting and honoring their parents, and I'm going to show you a rare home. I'll show you a Duggar family or one of those others that, I mean, they're really, they're really trying to live by the Bible, and they'll get mocked and laughed at by the world. And so I want us to focus this morning on verse 4. The best counsel ever given to parents is summed up in one verse. Now, listen. The Bible speaks a lot more other than parenting in this verse, but Paul is summing up basically in one verse what should happen. And that's our verse this morning. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Other versions use another word other than training or admonition, but they're both pretty close. And so let me just make a couple of statements quickly. When the Bible says, when you read a passage, don't be legalistic and read into things that are not there. So when it says, and you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, is the Bible saying only fathers are supposed to raise their children? No, but remember the society that this is being written to, okay? This is not 2017. This was about 2,000 years ago. And in that society, and think about this, because we're not that far removed, and I'll give you some examples less than 20 miles from here. But in that society, when the father went off to work, whether he was a farmer, whether he was a blacksmith, and he made shoes for the horse or whatever he did when he left the house, guess where that 8 or 9 or 10-year-old kid went? Yeah, have you ever gone to the Amish community or Mennonite? Someone here at the church told me they had them come over and do some work, and they told me their 9 or 10-year-old kid was as skilled as their 18 and 20-year-old brothers. So in that community, that's still happening 2,000 years later. The father is going to work, if he's a carpenter or whatever, and the 8 or 10 or 12-year-old son is being influenced by dad. In other words, his role model was his dad. So as Paul is writing this, he's saying, and you fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. Now let me say this. So he's not saying only fathers are to raise their kids. Nor is he saying that at all costs, don't let your kids be angry, so whatever they want, give it to them. No, he's saying, listen, there's enough sin and there's enough selfishness and anger in the heart of every kid. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of reproof will drive it far from them. He's saying, let them get mad, but don't let it be because of something you cause them foolishly to do. They're going to be sinfully angry on their own when they don't get their way in life. Make sure, dads, that you don't provoke them to anger because you mistreated them in your discipline. Okay, that's what he's saying. So as we get started this morning, let's jump in. And I want to talk about, what does it mean to provoke? Well, the word means to incite, to elicit emotions, to irritate, depending on the different versions as you look up. But to provoke means basically to tick them off in the vernacular, to get them upset, to get them angry, or to have them become bitter. So as Paul is addressing this, he's not saying only men can discipline children and raise them. He's saying the responsibility is going to fall more on the husband, the father, than it does on the wife. Let me say this, and this would be true in the vast majority of homes. Mothers are almost guaranteed to be loving and nurturing and smothering or mothering. That's just your nature. Guys are normally the X factor. You're normally going to get the love and the nurturing from a mom. That's why 90% of the time when there is a court case and the judge is going to give the kids not all the time, there are a lot of exceptions, and there needs to be some exceptions in some cases. But the majority of the time, the judge is going to give that kid or kids to the mother because the mother throws her whole life into her kids. Whereas the father oftentimes focuses on the job, bringing home the bacon. And so what I'm saying is the mothering is going to be there, the nurturing and the love. We're living in a society that's saying we don't need husbands. We don't need fathers. In fact, we can go artificial insemination and we don't need a man in our lives. Well, the fact of the matter is that's not true. And statistics continually to show what happens when the father abdicates or walks away from the home, and what happens when a mother tries to raise kids without the influence of a husband. It can be done, but it's difficult. Do I have some stats up here on the... you can just kind of look at some of those stats. This is what happens in our modern feminist movement and also our movement where there is free sex and no accountability. This is what happens when government says, hey, don't marry, because ma'am, if you marry, we're not going to give you $300 to $500 every month per kid. So we're going to reward you for living in adultery or fornication. And if you look at some of these stats, this is what happens in a culture where the father is now being absent. You can kind of look at what happens if there's the love, but there's not the firmness. Do I have one more slide? When you put one more, you could just look at 90% of homeless and runaway children is when there's no dad. 80% of rapists motivated with anger comes from fathers' homes. Just go on and just look at 2/3 of the time there was no dad in the home. Just go on. I'll let you just look at all those. But the point is that you need that father. And a society that's saying we can even get pregnant. We don't need no father in this home. You're seeing modern America where you're having a mother and no father. And the fact of the matter is you need both. And if you're here today and you're a single parent, you understand how difficult it is trying to raise a child without a spouse. And my prayers are with you that God would give you a godly spouse in time. So I want us to jump in this morning. And I want to talk about parenting, one of the most difficult things that you'll ever face. It's a lifelong endeavor. And so as we jump in this morning, I want to talk, I heard somebody say this. They don't pay taxes, they barely speak English, and they want our jobs. Something needs to be done about our children. Some of you are saying, what's he talking about? Go ahead and explain it to them. That's a location joke. You had to be there to understand it. You can explain it to your spouse afterwards. But I want to talk about provoking your children to anger. Guys, we have a tendency to be firm, to be direct. We understand what we want. This is what we're going to go for. And we're like a bull in a china shop. We lack the mom's touch, the wife's touch on being gentle and loving. Sometimes we might be often right in what we're saying, but we're harsh in our delivery. And so as we jump in this morning, I want to talk about how do we provoke our children to anger in a wrong way? What are some of the things that all of us do? Now, I think I'm going to list, 8 or 9. In fact, one is not in your outline. I'm going to go ahead and give it to you now. If you're a note taker, are we missing F? Is F missing? What's missing in your thing? Okay, I'll just, by showing, put a blank. So if you're a note taker, by showing, put in between E and G. F, by showing, put a blank, and then when I get there, you'll be ready to go. But what are some ways we tick our kids off that's not right? What are some things that all of us do? It doesn't matter if you're doing 7 of these right. If you're messing up on one, that's all it takes is to cause your child to be ticked off at you or God for the wrong reason. Now, let me say this, kids. Your parents are not perfect, and neither will you be. And so I would encourage you to be a person of grace. Did I tell you that I went to my brother's church quite a few years ago? And I was there sitting, the youth pastor got up and he shared a testimony. And he talked about, you know what? He said, growing up, he said, I had good parents. He said, oh, they didn't walk on water, but they were good. They were fair. They were consistent. They were good people. He said, but you know what? I was snotty. I was rebellious. I challenged them. And he said, I'm not blaming them for any of the choices they made. It was me. And afterwards, I ran right up to him. I said, you're the first person that's ever said, you know what? I had good parents. I was just rebellious and snotty, and I challenged them, and they did to me what I deserved. And I thought, you were the first honest person. Everybody's saying how terrible their parents were, and they were the greatest kids since sliced bread. So as we jump in this morning, if you're young and you're listening to this, or your 20s or 30s and you're listening to this, I would encourage you to be a person of grace, because it will come back to you one time if you're holding some ridiculous standard over your parents. So how do we provoke our children? Let me just give you 8 or 9 quickly. I can't take 10 minutes on each point, or 20, because this would be a 3-week message like every topic would be. So here's Matthew 5:37 says, let your yes be a... When you're talking to a person, and let your no be a what? And then it says anything past that is from Satan. Is that a strong passage? Anything, whatever is more than a yes and a yes, or a no is a no, is from the evil one. Here's the first thing that I want to say to you as we get started this morning. When you're not a person of your word, you're going to frustrate your child. When you say you're going to do this and you don't, when you say you're going to reward them and you don't, when you say whatever you're going to do and you don't back it up, you will provoke them to anger, because you said one thing, but you're not doing it. The first thing I want to say to you is by not being a person of your word. If you say you're going to do this at this time, then it's important that you do it, because other than that, you're going to frustrate them and cause them to be angry with you and to be bitter. Here's the second one. When Ephesians 4:29 says, let no unwholesome word proceed out of your mouth, but only that which gives edification and gives grace to the hearer. And let your words be seasoned with grace, and let them be seasoned with salt when you speak to people. A lot of times we cause our children to be bitter when we're critical and always criticize. Listen, there's constructive criticism that has to go on. We're not talking about that. But when we criticize our children, we frustrate them. There's an old saying, any jackass can kick a barn down, but it takes a wise builder to build one up. And anybody can sit there and criticize, but it takes a wise parent to try to build that person up. And oftentimes when we're critical of our kids, when we highlight their flaws, we cause them to be angry. They feel inferior. They feel they cannot measure up, which leads me to see then in your outline. In this age of... I see these travel teams. They have travel teams for 7 and 8 years old of all kinds of sports, where the kids are just taking off and traveling, and the push for perfection to be this great soccer star, or baseball star, or basketball star. And there is this push that our kids are supposed to be perfect at an early age. And what? You got to be in calculus? What's wrong with you? I thought, be in calculus? I can't even spell it correctly. I'm not kidding, guys. About 10, 12 years ago, one of my kids came home. It was like 7th or 8th grade math. And they asked me to do a problem. And now they don't even let you bring the books home anymore. Have y'all noticed that? It's like, what's up with this? You know what I'm saying? I used to love to bring my books home so I could draw funny pictures in the corner. I would do those where it was a stick man, and it would take me like 150 pages. And it was like a guy throwing a football. And go like that. And now you can't even do it anymore. You can't bring the books home. But one of my kids showed me the math problem. He was like 7th or 8th grade, and I thought, I don't know how to do it. I thought, this is not new math. This is no math. I don't know how to do this kind of math that you're giving me. And what I'm saying is, a lot of times we're pushing our kids to perfection. And sometimes you didn't make the ball team. You didn't make the squad. And a kid is growing up feeling second class, feeling inferior, because they didn't measure up. Here's E in your outline. In 1 Samuel chapter 3, there was a big shot by the name, he was a high priest by the name of Eli. And let's say he's the governor, to put it in the term you can understand, over Kentucky, and your dad's the governor. Kids can take advantage of their dad's status, because you get to go in the nicest places, you know what I'm saying? You get all the big shots, the top bankers, and you name it, the top everything, real estate, attorneys come together. You're always hosting things, and you can take advantage of your position. Well, Eli's 2 sons were taking advantage of their position. And a priest would make a sacrifice, said, I'll take all that the ribeyes and that you're throwing away, taking everything for themselves. Taking advantage of women, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is what the Lord said. Then the Lord said to Samuel, behold, I'll do something in Israel, which both ears of everyone who hears it will what? Now, I would say that's an admonition. That's a warning. In that day, I will perform against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from what? All the things I've said I will do from beginning to end. For I have told that I will judge his house for the weekend. Forever, for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile. And what? Some of your versions says rebuke. Other versions say restrain. Guess what? Big shot Eli did not do to his kids. He didn't what? He didn't discipline them. And that's why it's very hard for a mom by herself to have to discipline her kids without a husband, because it's your nature to be loving. And it's hard for you to be harsh and firm. That's not your nature. For guys, I got no problem being firm with my kids. I don't. You know what I'm saying? That's that bulldog part. If I think I'm right, I don't care if everybody kneels against me. If I say God created the world and all of you say, no, God didn't create the world, I got no problem looking at all of you and say, you're off your rocker. I don't care if you like me. I'm more afraid of being wrong with God than I am being right in your eyes. And if I'm right with God, then I'm right. It doesn't matter how many of you agree with me not. This is not democracy where you're voting on what I'm saying. God will vote, and he'll face me on Judgment Day and tell me if I did something wrong. And so I'm not afraid whether you like me or not. I'm afraid that I didn't tell you the truth. That's what I was afraid of, quote, hurting your feelings. So I've learned a long time ago, I'm not afraid. Now, that's a strength and a weakness. You can be bullheaded. You can be a lot of things because you're so, this is right. And sometimes you can be right, but you're wrong at the way you spoke and delivered it, and that makes you wrong. Right. So you following me? There's strength and weaknesses in both the husband and the wife. But he says, I'm going to have to judge that man in leadership because he let his kids do whatever they wanted to do. Here's in your outline. Here's E. Give me a few minutes. A lot of times we'll spoil our children by pampering them. Somebody at this church told me, I think they're sitting here, but we were several people over the last year. I've been talking about things we got for Christmas. One of them told me, and this person's not 95 or 110 years old. I'm assuming they're early 60s. And the person told me they thought they were all that in a bag of chips when on Christmas Day, for their Christmas present, they got an orange. If I'm not mistaken, that person has told me that. That's what they got. I remember, and guys, I'm not 105 either. I remember when I was young, for Christmas, I got a present. It was a long broom handle, and there was a horse head on the end. Do y'all remember that? Oh, man, I thought I was all that and on a stick, and it was on a stick. Man, I thought I was Roy Rogers, and I was just cruising all around Brownsville, Texas, and that was it. That was my Christmas present. You know what you're doing you know what we're doing to our kids now? It's a sin, the stuff. We spend more on dog food in America than we do on foreign missions to get the gospel out. Let me repeat that. We spend more in the United States of America on dog food than we do on foreign missionaries to get the gospel out throughout the world. That's a sin. And I love dogs, and we got a cute little dog. But we sin against our kids when we pamper them. How's that? Well, the reason is when they get pulled over by that policeman's not going to pamper them. When they don't make a grade they want in school and they want that teacher to change it, that teacher is not going to pamper them. And we can go on and on and on and on, but at some point their influence and their money and their all this stuff is not going to buy them in the world. And you talk about becoming angry and being provoked. And the fact is, sometimes we pamper our kids. We don't tell them what's right or wrong. Let me give you You know, kids get their master's degree in being a weasel before they're a teenager. That's what I realize. So your kids might be a doctorate. He's Dr. Weasel. And you don't have to have any class to teach your kids to be sneaky. Have you ever noticed that? Now, come here, Junior. This is how you're sneaky. This is how you sneak a cookie out of the cookie jar without letting me know. You never have to have a class on sneaky. It's in our heart. We're sinful people. That's our nature. I was born in iniquity. Listen, we could be here forever on this one, but when they get their doctorate in being a weasel and try to operate on you, they're going to tell you things like, well, Dad, Mom, if you love me, you know what I've learned to tell them? I do love you. That's why I'm saying no. That's what they're going to say to you. If you love me, I do love you. And no is not a word of hate. I say no to every girl in the United States because I said yes to one. So no is not a bad word. No is a good word. I said yes to your mother. And when I said that, that's no to everybody else. So when they pull the if you love me, say I do love you. And that's why I'm telling you no, because Father knows best. You might think I'm cruel, I'm strict, I'm everything. But when you become 25 or 30 and have kids, you're going to say, oh, now I know. Here's another one. Your kids are going to say, Dad, Mom, other kids are doing it. You know what I've learned to tell them? Well, if I was the parent of those other kids wouldn't be doing it. So they're going to try to pull that other kids are doing. Well, other kids at New Hope are getting to. No, they're not other kids. One. The rest of them, their parents are doing the same thing we're doing. They're going to pull that other kids are doing it. And I say, you know what? If they were my kids, they wouldn't be doing it either. All right, here's another one. In the master of being a weasel, I'll be mad at you. Isn't Facebook, are these BFF, does that mean best friends forever? Okay. I told my kid one time, I'm not here to be your best friend forever. I'm here to be your daddy. Whether you like me is immaterial, but you will obey me. You know what I'm saying? And so they're going to try to pull this, it doesn't matter if you're mad at me. That's not a manipulative way to get your way with me. I'm not going to pamper your sinful or selfish desire. Pampering your kids, my friend, is a guarantee to get your child bitter at you. Here's the next one that's not in your outline, but if you wrote it down, or if not, you can write it down now. Showing favoritism. Can you think of somebody in their Bible? Listen, sometimes a parent shows favoritism to one of the kids, and it's not the kid's fault. Okay. If you're like me, I have a wide range of kids. Sometimes you can go 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 years between kids. Joanne's mother was 16 when she had her first, and 25 years later, she had the last. So can you imagine? There's a 25-year gap. She was 16 when she had her first child, 40 when her youngest brother didn't even know the oldest sister. It was like a mother. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of times there's a big gap, and the way you treat your first kid is going to be different from the way you treat your last kid. Let's say you got married at 22, 23, 24. You probably didn't have a lot of money. You just started in the work world. Let's say your last kid comes around 10, 12, 15 years later. You're now mid-30s, late 30s. You got a lot more money in your bank account. You're making more. And so guess what? Junior's probably going to get a little nicer. That's just life. And God allows that so that you can learn to be grateful for what you had. And God allows all those things in life. Well, there was a parent in the Bible, and unfortunately, he showed favoritism to one of his kids. That's not the kid's fault. But the father was, and sometimes if you're the baby, you do get that special privilege because you're 14, you got a 6-month-old baby. What is your mom doing with that 6-month-old baby most of the time? Giving a lot of time because that baby is a baby. And you can't tell your 6-month-old, quit being a baby. Because the 6-month will say to you, I am a baby. And so there's going to be times where your parents are going to give a lot more time to one kid than the other. Those are things that just happen in life. And God will allow that to show you your heart. But where am I going with this? Oh, yes. This parent, he really lavished his kid with a really, really sharp-looking coat. And you know who it is. Now, it's not Joseph's fault his dad gave him a nice coat. But look at the hell that brought into that family when all of the brothers got jealous of Joseph. It wasn't Joseph's fault. He just, thanks, Dad. And then you saw the heart of man by the way they treated Joseph and how it broke the dad's heart. You know the whole story. But let me give 4 reasons why sometimes we can show favoritism. We're wrong, but we do it. Sometimes maybe you're a mom and you show favoritism to a daughter, or a father and you show favoritism to a son. So I never have any emotions when I have any kids. I love them all. You know what I'm saying? Now, after they're born, I might not say it, but you know what I'm saying? Male or female, doesn't matter. Sometimes you show favoritism because of gender. Sometimes because they excel more. Some kids are more athletic. Some kids are more artistic. Some kids are more personal and more outgoing. That's just life. You cannot like a kid more. Sometimes you like your kid because biologically he's yours and you're in a blended family. Every kid is equal. God doesn't say, man, Herb, that one kid you have that's an all-state ball player, woo, I sure like him. That means nothing to God. Those doesn't matter if you're excelling in an area. God doesn't look at that. And sometimes you might like a child because he's a little bit better behaved. Now, he might get more privileges, but we can't show favoritism. And if we do that, kids aren't dumb and they can pick up on that. And they can resent that. Let me give you 2 more quickly. There was a kid many, many, many years ago, and we were talking. In fact, after the service, another man in our church came up, and he told me the exact same story. I said, I wasn't talking to you. It was somebody that no longer is in the area. But he said, Herb, I did the same thing. He said, you can use me as an example. I said, no, I'll save it for another sermon. But this kid came up to me, and he was a really good athlete in this town. He played all-stars in our area. And he said, Herb, I signed up to play baseball. And I said, great. He said, well, no, not great. I said, why not? He says, I don't want to do it. I said, what do you mean you don't want to do it? Why'd you sign up? He says, because my dad makes me. I said, what do you mean your dad makes me? He said, my dad makes me play whatever, let's say baseball. I said, but you don't want to? He said, no. Sometimes you want to get into band. You want to get into different kinds of things. You know what I'm saying? You have different desires in school. But he's a great kid, really compliant. So I said, so you're going to play even though you don't want to do it at all? I said, did you tell your dad? But he wants me to play. I thought, what a great kid. Here's my point. The vast majority of kids would become rebellious and anger. Listen, sometimes you got a kid that's compliant. Doesn't mean he's saved. Just means he's got a good attitude. Here's what I'm saying. You want to drive your kid to become bitter? Expect them to carry out your plans for their life. Maybe you want your kid to be one of the top salesmen in the area, but your kid doesn't really want to spend that much time making money. He really wants to spend more time with his family. And making a lot of money is not important to him. Maybe he doesn't want to be an attorney. Maybe he doesn't want to be a banker. Maybe he doesn't want to be a doctor. Maybe he just wants to be a school teacher, and he's happy with that. And so what you're doing is you're living vicariously through your kid. And like this parent who's a Christian, loved the Lord, really was forcing his kid to play a sport. And the kid was saying, but I really want to do other things now. In school, I have other interests. You talk about causing bitterness in a kid. Try to get them to live your will for their life. Let me give you one more quick one. Sometimes if you have a kid that's 5, expect them to act like a 5-year-old, not a 10-year-old. And sometimes in our excel world, we're trying to push a person to be here when they're only here. Do you understand that God gifts everybody with different kinds of mind? Do you understand that? How would you like to be compared if your brother was Albert Einstein? Would you like your parents to say, why can't you make an A in calculus like your brother? Well, doggone, nobody's like Albert, Mom, Dad. Albert's ahead of the ballgame. Can you imagine if you sang in a choir for your church or your school, and you just had the voice of a 12-year-old, and your parents said, why can't you sing like your sister Barbara Streisand? Well, doggone, Mom, there are not a lot of people that can sing like Barbara. And so when you start comparing them and pushing them to this excellence, you frustrate them. Because some people, you know what? They're not straight A students. They're straight C students on a good day. Do you understand that everybody's brain is different? And some people are dyslexic. We can go on and on and on. And their brains just can't gather information and regurgitate it, stick it on paper as well as other people. Some people excel in math and calculus and science and geometry and biology and all these kind of things. And that's just their way their brain works. They excel and they're going to be accountants and they're really, really smart. Others are terrible. They can't multiply 8 times 10, but they're creative and artistic and they can draw or write a jingle, and that's just their way their brain works. And the try to make a kid who's not good in, say, a math or a science or whatever, compare him with someone else. God might have made him to be a straight C student on his best day. You want a kid to be bitter and frustrated and feel stupid and dumb, inferior? Keep pushing them and comparing them in that sense. And sometimes we expect a kid who's 10 to act like a 20-year-old. They're going to be clumsy. They're going to spill things. They're going to break things. Their dexterity is not quite there. And here's the last one I want to say to you is by expecting too much too soon. Man, let them be whatever their age is. I heard a humorous story. It's true. This mother said, we were out at a restaurant and my 6-year-old asked if he could say grace. So we all bowed our heads, and she wrote it down. He prayed, God is good, God is great. Thank you for the food. And God, I would thank you even more if Mom gets us ice cream for dessert and liberty and justice for all. Amen. Now, guys, he's 6 years old. Okay, he's 6 years old, Just that's an honest prayer of a 6-year-old. Well, several of the customers that were close by in chairs, they all were snickering, laughing. It was cute and everything. And a lady gets up and she said, I want to let you know that's what's wrong with this generation. Can you imagine asking God for ice cream? Ooh, she kind of chewed out that little, some people just, get up on the wrong side of the bed. You know what I'm saying? Wrong side of the decade, I guess. And so she just thought that was so irreverent. Well, the little kid said, Mom, did I do something wrong? About, crying. Dad, no, son, you did nothing wrong. That was a beautiful prayer. An older gentleman saw that. He got up and he walked over and he basically told the kid, he said, I want to let you know that God thought you prayed a great prayer. And the little boy said, really? He says, yeah. He says, and then he whispered loud enough, I think, for that lady could hear. He says, I think God would be pleased if more people asked for ice cream. He says, too bad some people never ask God for ice cream. And he said, the old man, he says, little man, ice cream's good for the soul. And he walked away. So they brought ice cream to the little boy, and the mom said, I'll never forget this. This is what her 6-year-old did. When he sat down, he looked at it. Now, he's 6-year-old. He doesn't understand about vengeance or any of that kind of stuff. When he got his ice cream, he looked at it. He thought about what that man said, ice cream is good for the soul. He thought about what that lady that got up and kind of rebuked him for that, quote, selfish prayer. And he got up, and he got his ice cream, and he walked over to where that older lady was, and he sat it right before, and he says, with a big, completely innocent smile on his face, he said, here, lady, this is for you. A little ice cream is good for the soul, and my soul is good already. We expect too much too soon. You yell at them because they're putting their feet on the sofa. Come on. Love people, use things. Don't use people and love things. And oftentimes we do things that we sit back and say, you know what, that wasn't Jesus. By expecting way too much of our kids from whatever stage they're in. Let's move then to how do we train and admonish? What's the difference between training and admonish? They're both really close. The only difference between training and admonish comes with a warning. Okay? Son, sweetheart, if you do this, these are the consequences. I'm warning you. And God did that at the garden. He says, you know what, Adam and Eve, you can have everything here except what? Now, if you do that, on the day that you do it, guess what? You shall surely, that's admonishing. I'm telling you. These are the consequences if you don't do this. In our modern preaching, we've removed admonishing. Everything's positive and lovey and dovey. Can you imagine God saying, hey, Adam and Eve, I'd love to tell you not to touch that, but in doing that, that might not be popular, so I'm not going to tell you not to touch that. No, as parents, we need to train, and part of that training is admonishing. Saying there are consequences to that behavior. If you do that, this is what mommy and daddy will do. If you do this and daddy and mommy are not around and you're out of the house, and this is what the police will do. This is what the school will do. This is what your boss or supervisor will do. That's part of training them. So I'm going to just give you 4. And the first one I give you, you're going to say, Herb, wait a minute. That's not part of training kids. But when I finish, you'll say that, okay, I see where you're going with this. And fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. We have much more tendency to tick our kids off than the mamas do. Now, many people stay mad at their moms as long as they do their dads. Okay, let me illustrate it. You ever watch some of these detective movies? And they bring in a person for interrogation. And they're pretty sure he's guilty. Well, the one cop will come and he'll be mean and harsh. And man, I know you did it. You're nothing but a low down slime ball. And that's on a good day. And that cop is just raking him over the coals. And then when he finishes, the guy just, no, I didn't do it. No, I'm innocent. And then that cop leaves and another cop comes in. And he's kind of like a grandpa cop, right? And he's kind of loving and say, I know you probably had a bad day. You probably really didn't mean to do that. That wasn't in your heart. It was an accident when you stabbed him 50 times. And he'll come and he'll do the loving approach. And we call that the bad cop, good cop approach. The bad cop sets you up and gets that, but then the good cop comes and all of a sudden, okay, I'll talk to you because you're nice to me. In your marriage, listen, parents, normally you wives are guess what kind of cop? You're the good cop. Guess who gets to be the bad guy? So Joanne and I determined 30 years ago that this is how we're good cop, bad cop. My wife is sweet. She's like a combination of Bambi and Santa Claus. And I'm in between Genghis Khan and, Marco Polo or whoever one of these guys are. And so we had to make this determination that sometimes the kids will try to weasel and get around daddy by going to mom. Or if mommy said something, try to weasel in with me. And so we made a pact. When our kids say something like, Joanne, the kid might say, well, mom said this and that. Now, in my heart, I'm thinking, what the heck was Joanne talking about? But we always have a united front in front of our kids. Follow me? No, I back up your mom. Even if she said do 7,000 push-ups. I know if she said it, it had to make sense and had to be right. She's a Christian lady. So if it's been reported to me the way it's been reported, it's probably not being said the way it was said. So what we have come to an agreement is we will always have a united front. Your mama said it, I'm behind it. Now, we'll go behind doors. I'll say, honey, what the heck were you? What the heck were you thinking? We'll talk about it behind. But I always back her up, and she always tries to back me up because we have a united front. Because if you don't, you'll make your kids angry and bitter. Because they'll say, what mommy said. And I told one of my kids a long time ago, I want you to listen to me right now. You're trying to put a wedge between your mommy and daddy. Well, I want to tell you right now, I chose your mama. You came potluck. So don't. And you know what? I'm going to have to be with her when you're out of the house in 18 and 19 and off to whatever you're doing. And so what I'm saying is A in your outline here. Fathers, read scriptures and explain child rearing or raising principles with your wife. It's important that you're both on the same page. If not, it'll be very frustrating to the kid. Talk about those things. This is what we'll do. Now, a wise husband will listen to his wife, will listen to the mom, because sometimes you do need to yield. Sometimes you do need to give in. And sometimes as guys, we're very cut and dry. This is the way it is. I've got no problems trying to be a best friend forever with my kids. That's my nature. I'm more blunt, more prophetic. This is the way it is, and that's just the way it is. And that's good to a degree, but sometimes you can be too firm, guys. And listen to the good cop. But wives, oftentimes your sensitive and gentle nature will make you think your husband is too harsh when he's simply sometimes being right on target. In your outline, if you're going to train and admonish your kids, start by explaining child raising principles to your wife. Because if you don't, you will have a frustrated parenting experience, and your child will learn to go between you and cause problems. Okay, let's talk about directly to the kids then. In Deuteronomy chapter 11, God admonishes the parents, the father, therefore you shall lay up these words of mine in your heart, read them, memorize these important truths, or at least not verbatim, word for word, understand the principle, and bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes. If you go to a very Orthodox Jewish person, sometimes when they'll go to minister, they will actually do this verse. They will get this and they will tie it right inside their arm, or sometimes even on a box on their forehead, as these verses say. I had several of my Jewish friends I went to a high school in Houston called Bel Air High School, and there were so many Jewish people, kids there. We were known as Hebrew High. People laughed at us and called us Hebrew High because most of the Jewish people in Houston went to my high school. But I had several of my friends where they were Jewish by background, just like they were no more Jewish than I was Christian, even though we went to a Protestant Southern Baptist church. But at their homes, a lot of them would have this little scripture verse. It was Deuteronomy 6:5. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. That's what it says. And they have it right there, like a little scroll right on the side of their door. And they're just following. They're taking this literally. And it'll be a sign on your hand, and they shall be as a frontlets between their eyes. Some will have it here, some will have it on their forehead. You shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you what? Rise up. The modern church has some good things, and there's some really not good things about this. To be honest with you, the older I get, the more I'd like to have about 20 chairs and just meet with 20 of you every Sunday. I really, the Jehovah's Witness, they break up at 200. I think the Mormons do too. Once they get that big, you know what they do? They don't allow their churches to get big. Because the bigger we get, you can kind of just space out. You kind of just, it's like a shopping mall. You go to a large shopping mall in America now and something for everybody. The kids could go to Abercrombie and snitch, you know what I'm saying, or whatever, you know what I'm saying? They can go to there. Three of you got that. You can just drop them off and everybody kind of does their own thing. But we're going to go back to house churches pretty soon in America as the persecution arises. Like in China and many other places, you can't meet in a building like this. It's illegal. You have to meet in a small group. And you meet with 5, 7, 8 families. And to be honest with you, that's probably a better way to do church. Because you can reach your neighborhood. All of you become leaders of your group. That's really what this was. They didn't meet and look, read your New Testament. The Jewish people kicked out the Christians. What? You're adding Jesus to it? No, Jesus is no. And so they met in homes. And so what I'm saying is this. What's good about the church, there are some good things, there's some bad things, is that there's this shopping mall approach. I will drop off my kids and the youth minister or the children's minister will be responsible for my child's growth and maturity. That's what's happened since we moved into big buildings like this. Because when you come and there's 4 or 5, 6 families, you have a high school kid, 3 junior, and you're all mixed. It's not about, I'm finding a church for my kid. Where is that in your Bible? Where is youth pastor? Yes, we do have but where is youth pastor and children in your New Testament? There is no such thing. Let me tell you this. I admire this one of the largest churches in America. This is what he does. He hears the Holy Spirit. Once a month, if you have a child, 1st grade, preschool, 5th grade, a high school senior, once a month during Sunday school, they don't have Sunday school for your kids. They have Sunday school for every one of you parent. And they teach you how to be the youth pastor and children's minister. They got it right. Saying, you're there 160 hours a week. You're the one you're their youth pastor. You're their children's pastor. We're going to obviously teach them biblical principles. We're going to try to lead your child to Christ, but we're just supplementing what you do throughout the week. So we're going to teach you how to teach your kids the Bible. I thought, they got it. That is exactly the way it should be. It is not the responsibility of the church to lead your high school, your junior high, your preschool, any kid to Christ, though we will do it. Mama and daddy, that's your responsibility. And with this big church mentality, with this cool hip, we got our band, we got all this kind of stuff. It's not their job. It's your job to read the Bible and to pray and to challenge them to get saved. Now, whether they get saved or not, that's out of your hand. And what I'm saying there in your outline is that your greatest job description, parent, is to seek to lead your child to a saving relationship with Jesus. Listen, our kids are sweet and innocent. Your kid is not sweet and innocent. Your kid would stab you in the back if he was 6 months old. And if he was 6 months old, but as tall as he is now, 6 foot and 190 pounds, you know what he's doing in that crib? He's saying, I want you. You've already fed him and burped him. You know what he's saying? Hold me. I don't care if I wake you up at 2 a.m. I want you to hold me because I want to feel good and comfortable and secure. And if that poor little baby had boxing gloves and he had the body of a 20-year-old, mama, you wouldn't live very long. No, your sweet, innocent kid has a sinful nature like everybody else. And part of you leading your child to Christ, you personally talking to him, you talk about the holiness of God, that God is good, that God is perfect, that God is sinless, that God can only accept sinless. And then you talk about the sinful nature of man, that our hearts are dark, that we're desperately wicked, that there's no one good, no, not one. And you tell them that he can't measure up, that he's sinful by nature, that he can't change his character. He might change his behavior, but only God can change your heart. It is up to every parent then to now some will love it and some will accept Christ, some will rebel against it. No, I want to be the Lord of my life. I want what I want. And that's out of your hands. But it's not the job of a church to do what God has put you in control of. God needed a babysitter and he chose you when he chose those kids. And what I'm saying is, it is up to you, mom and dad, to ask your kid, what will it take for you to give your life to Christ? Do you understand what Christ did for you at Calvary when he rose from the dead? Do you understand God's great love for you, that he'd rather die on a cross than live without you? Do you understand if you try to live your life apart from him, you'll be frustrated. You'll pick up bad traits and habits. You won't have the Holy Spirit. Oh, you might have a pleasant personality, but deep down, you're still a selfish person that looks pleasant outwardly. You can never be good enough, because if you could be good enough, Jesus wasted his time dying on a cross. You cannot be good enough. It's impossible. But there is a God that loves you and that can save you and can come into your life and give you purpose and meaning in your life and can forgive you of everything you've ever done. Mom and dad, that is your responsibility to share Jesus Christ with your kids. That's the best parenting you can do. See, you can focus on behavior, and to some degree you will need to do that when they're young. But at some point you need to tell them it becomes an issue of the heart. Because good behavior will not get you into a good heaven. Good people don't go to heaven. Saved people go to heaven. Listen to me very carefully this morning. You can focus on behavior all you want to. But if you focus on the heart of God coming into the heart, those things will begin to take care of itself. This is your heart apart from Christ. And this is your heart if you allow the Lord to save you. Here's the third thing. Let me give you two more, church, before we close. I've heard this many a time and I thought, okay, I'm not sure this person fully understands the gospel. I understand it when it's a lay person, a person who hasn't studied the Word of God. It's a little bit grieving to me if it's a minister who's saying this and doesn't fully understand what he's saying, because this is the doctrinal, cardinal truth of the Bible. And if they're missing this, boy, they're getting into this ooey gooey, lovey dovey gospel that everything's just pleasant and happy stuff. I've heard people say, well, we can never be worthy enough. Okay, what do you mean by that? Are you meaning that we can never be worthy enough to save ourselves? Absolutely right. That is true. We're depraved. There is nothing in us that can ever make ourselves appealing to God on our own. We can never earn our salvation or buy it. That's true. But here's the important thing. If you tell me your child is saved, then the rest of your life you need to spend trying to help your child grow and walk a life worthy of the gospel. Listen to what I'm saying to you this morning. You don't walk a life worthy to be saved. You walk a worthy life because you are saved. And as a mom and dad, then you tie everything they will do from that point on is, how does this reflect on the glory and on the nature and the character of Christ? Y'all know what an ambassador is? An ambassador from America to Russia, an ambassador to China, ambassador to Saudi Arabia. When an ambassador goes to Saudi Arabia or to China, does he represent the interest of China or Saudi Arabia or the United States of America? He represents what? Our interest. He's living there. He's going to live a moral life, but he's there to represent our interest. If at any point that guy wants to start representing communism or Islam and Sharia law or anything else, at any point, if that American ambassador starts representing the interest of that nation, you know what our country will do with that ambassador? Yank him and bring him out. You're not here to represent the interest of you or the United States of America. You're here to represent the interest of God Almighty if you're saved and if you say your kid is saved. And then everything you teach them from this day forward, you represent God to a dying world. The reason Daddy's asking you not to dress like that is because the reason Daddy's asking you not to put that in your mouth, the reason Daddy's asking you not to watch that or listen to that, because everything as a Christian that you're doing from this day forward is representing God to a people that will never ever seek after after Him unless they see Jesus in you. And here's what I'm saying in your outline. See them. Encourage your kids to walk a life worthy of the gospel. Everything we do at church will simply supplement, back up what you're doing at home. But your job as a parent is to do all you can to try to lead them to Christ. And then at that point to say, the reason Daddy does this with money, the reason Daddy does that with money is because the reason Daddy doesn't want us to watch that or hear that is because of this and that and that. And so you tie in everything. The reason we're asking you to dress, speak, all those things is because you represent, you're an ambassador. You're an ambassador of a different nation, of the kingdom of God on this planet. And God is asking you to represent His best interests so you can be salt to a world that's decaying, so you can be light to a world that's in darkness. Encourage your kids to walk worthy of the gospel. And here's the last point I want to make. Quite a few years ago, there was a young Jewish guy who really admired his father. His father was very pious, very religious, and they were Jewish. Long story short, they had moved to another town, and if you're familiar with Germany, Germany has a state religion, and that's being a Lutheran. So if you're in Germany, you basically had to be a Lutheran almost forever, for a long time. That was the state religion. That's what our forefathers fought when they came here. They didn't want to make the Assemblies of God or the Baptist or the Catholic Church the state religion, where the state gives money to supply pastors. You follow what I'm saying? So our forefathers said, no state religion in America. Not separation of church and state. We separate godly people from government, but we don't want the government coming in and telling the church what to do. Boy, they have twisted that one and fooled a whole bunch of people in America. They're saying, we don't want no nationally established denomination or religion. So it's not going to be Baptist or Assemblies of God or Catholic or Church of Christ that the government is going to stand and say, we're going to support all these churches. They're all going to be Baptists, and we're going to supply the pastors, and we're going to tell them what to preach. Long story short, his Jewish father, when they moved to another town, there was no synagogue. In most Jewish circles, to start a synagogue, I think you need 10 families with a male head to start an official synagogue, what we would call a church. And so when they moved there, because there was no synagogue and the father was in business, the father made a decision. He decided to become Lutheran. And the reason he decided to become Lutheran was for the business side of it, so he could conduct his sales. His son was really, really disillusioned with that. Really, Dad, you sold out. You're selling our Jewish heritage to become a Lutheran when you don't even believe? And so the longest story short, the son went to study in England and went to the British Museum there and started looking around and various ideas and writing a book and philosophies and how governments function. And long story short, he concocted a philosophy, a way of running a nation that really stemmed from his father's decision. And he founded a philosophy that has done great harm to hundreds of millions of people in our world in the last 100 years. He founded communism, and his name was Karl Marx. And Karl basically said, with my father's misuse of the name of God for the sake of profit, it turned him then away so much from God that he became an atheist. And I want you to listen to me as I'm talking this morning, that the greatest way to teach your kids is not to talk it, but is to do it. And you can talk all you want to about the need for God and church and all this kind of stuff, but if all your decisions are not made throughout the week based upon the Word of God, if Jesus is not coming forth in your actions and the way you speak to people, they're just words. Let me tell you a story of this guy. I think he said he was about 10 years old. This was back many decades ago. You older folks will remember this. When the highlight of your year was maybe in the summer when the carnival would come to your town. Back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, the carnival would come to your town, and that was everything. Well, this guy said him and his father went to the carnival. They were waiting in line, and just before they got to purchase their tickets, there was a family in front of them. The family, it was a husband, a father, or a husband and a wife, a father and a mother. And they had 8 kids. And the guys, they looked all about 12 and under, so they probably had a kid every 15 months. And so there was 8 kids, and the father and mother, and he was so proud. and he had a chance to take all 8 of his kids to the circus. And when he got to the very front, he said, you could tell they were obviously poor, but they were dressed nice. They had clean clothes, but they were poor. And the father was so proud to have his 8 kids. And when he got to the very front to the tickets, he said, I would like 10 tickets, 2 adults, my wife and I, and 8 kids. And then the person behind the counter said the price. And apparently the man, bless his heart, he miscalculated. Because when they said the price, he realized he didn't have enough money. He said, I'm sorry, how much was that again? And then the embarrassment and the shame of all these people in line. And the man said, it's this much, and he didn't have enough, and it was obvious. And this kid telling the story that's an adult now. He's about 10, but now he's an adult. He said, I remember something my father did. He said, my father reached into his pocket and pulled out a 20, stepped right next to the man and dropped it. And said, oh, sir, I'm sorry. I think something just fell out of your pocket. And he handed the man the $20 bill. And he said that dad just reached over and he said he grabbed my father's hand with both hands and said, sir, you don't know how much this means to me. And he said, my father and I had to turn around and go home and miss the circus. And he said, but I didn't leave a poor man. I left a rich man. Daddies, you can talk all you want to. But when you sacrifice for other people, that's going to make Jesus attractive to them. Here's the last point, and I want to pray for you as we close this morning. The best way to teach them is to live it out before them. Listen to us, parents. We've made mistakes before. And maybe you're saying, Herb, but my kids are out of the house now, and I didn't live for Christ all those years. Is it too late? No, it's not too late. Obviously, you can't influence them daily like you used to. But you know what? I always believe honesty is the best policy. If somebody brings something up to you that's true. So you know what, sweetheart, son, I'm sorry, but I didn't live for Jesus. I know I cursed a lot, or we used to smoke, or I looked at filthy movies, or whatever that you did. Or I just didn't tell you about Jesus. Mommy and Daddy didn't know Christ, or we weren't living for Christ, but we are now. We want to tell you, we're sorry we didn't really influence you for Jesus, but I'm going to let you know that I'm praying for you now every day. And just be honest. That's all you can do. Mommies and Daddy, we weren't Christians back then. We made mistakes. If maybe you're here today and you're a single parent, Herb, can this be done? Absolutely, God can help you. It'll be harder. I'm a product of a father walking out and my mom having to raise 5 kids, and all 3 of us went to Bible. Can you imagine? All 3 boys from a dysfunctional family. 2 went into the ministry, and the third one, when he finished Bible college, realized, you know what? This is not for me to go full-time in the ministry. How could that be with a dad that walked out? By a godly mother influencing her kids for Jesus. You can do it. It's hard. It's difficult, but God will help you. Take advantage of the church. Take advantage of a Marty. Take advantage of a children's minister. That's why they're there, to help, to supplement what is difficult. Take advantage of the people of God. It will be difficult, but with God, nothing is impossible. And so as I pray for you this morning, God would give you grace on how to raise your children or grandchildren or whoever, a blended family, whoever that God has placed under your control, that you would put above sports and cheerleading and basketball and baseball and perfect grades and all this kind of stuff, that you would put Jesus above all that kind of stuff out there. Nothing wrong with having them do the best they can in whatever field that they're in or whatever pleasure or hobby or entertainment. But above everything else, you tie it into represent God the best that you can on that sports field. Represent God the best that you can as a cheerleader, playing that instrument in the band, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God.